Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the 100 Proof News Hound, here with another episode of the 100 Years and More Show. Today's a biographical episode. You know, if it wasn't for this man, you'd never have heard of Buick, Chevrolet, Cadillac, Oldsmobile, General Motors, even Frigidaire. His is more than a Horatio Alger rag to riches story. His is kind of a riches to rags to rags to riches to rags story. He made and lost multiple fortunes. Several times during his automotive career, he was more powerful than Henry Ford. Of course, I'm talking about William C. Durant, the founder and visionary behind General Motors. Now, make sure you like and subscribe. Now let's dive into William C. Durant's life. He's born in 1861 in Boston. They moved to Flint, Michigan shortly thereafter. And like virtually everybody that we've talked about in our previous episodes, if you want something done, if you want action, if you want to be on the cutting edge of anything, you have to go to the American Midwest in the late 19th, early 20th century. Again, New York's for the money, but the stuff gets done out in the Midwest. And here he is in Flint, Michigan. Now, he's born in 1861, which makes him 2 years older than Henry Ford. But at any point during his life, he always looked 20 years younger than Henry Ford. It's constantly commented on how youthful he is and how vigorous he is. Henry Ford always appeared much older than he was. William starts off in sales. He doesn't really know where to go. At the age of 25, though, he partners with another fellow from Flint, Josiah Dort, and they start the Flint Road Cart Company. Starts making horseless carriages. By 1895, the firm has prospered. They're making carriages. They've also branched out into bicycles. Here's an article of the Detroit Free Press, Saturday, November 9th, 1895. Firm name has changed. A special meeting of the stockholders of the Flint Road Cart Company, and that was probably just the two of them. It was decided to change the corporate name of the firm to the Durant Dort Carriage Company. The capacity of the works at present is 10,000 finished vehicles annually. So they're making 10,000 carriages a year. But it gets bigger for them. Saginaw News, July 28, 1898, Dort Carriage Company. Durant Carriage Company, the biggest firm here with a capacity of $175,000. It operates 3 factories and the output is 40,000 carriages yearly. It employs 600 men. They're making 40,000 carriages a year. He's only 37 years old. He's already a wealthy man. He could walk away right now if he wanted to. But that's not what he does. Because, well, him and his partner sense they see the writing on the wall. He's really never even ridden in a automobile in 1900, but they can see what the future is. They see it rolling down the street. So they decide to try to make an entrance into the automobile industry, and they choose a firm by the name of Buick, which at the time, in 1904, was a marginally unsuccessful auto manufacturer with limited sales and a lot of debt. Well, they purchase Buick, combine it with their carriage building company, and off they go. Within a couple of years, he's turned it around to the point where it's actually one of the larger manufacturers of automobiles in America. It's making money, and one thing that William Durant doesn't like to see is money sitting around. So he's purchasing things. He becomes a developer. He purchases other automobile companies. We'll get into the full field of that in a second here. But one of the things you have to realize is that in the early 1900s, the automobile sector is the equivalent of tech. Southeast Michigan, from Detroit out to Flint, is basically the Silicon Valley of the early 1900s, as hard as that may be to believe. Here's an article from the Detroit Free Press, April 22nd, 1907. It says, fields surrounding Flint change into factory sites. 6 years ago, Oak Park subdivision was planted in corn. Now 8 large manufacturing plants furnish employment to 1,500 men. It's a boomtown. There's more people than there are jobs than there are people. And people are making money hand over fist in the automotive sector. In 1909, Durant does something, the most important thing that he'll ever do in his life. He combines his Buick, Rainier, National, Reliance, and Olds company, he bought Oldsmobile, into a new company. And what does he call it? Well, headline, merger of auto concerns, 5 factories making 30% of the cars produced in the United States said to be in combination under the heading of General Motors Company. He starts General Motors. He's a big fan of vertical integration. By that, he wants to control all aspects of production and marketing and sales, all centrally, to cut costs and to produce as efficiently as possible the best cars that he can make. And he's very successful at that. Detroit Free Press has an article on December 20th, 1908, and this is an article that could come out of our headlines today. William C. Durant wants tariffs on autos lowered, not raised, lowered. And why? Because he's got it down to the point where he can make an automobile with only $100 labor. The rest is materials, okay? The rest is materials and insurance and transportation costs or whatever. But the labor cost is $100. You can't make a car cheaper than $100 labor. So he knows that he can undercut any foreign competition. He doesn't need the auto sector protected. He'd rather look tariffs go away so that perhaps France or whatever would reciprocate, and he can start selling his cars over there. It's also noted in the article that International Harvester is in the same situation. They're producing their equipment so cheaply, it's cheaper than the stuff in Europe. They don't need tariffs. But as I said, William C. Durant likes to buy things. He likes to invest, doesn't like to see money laying around. General Motors buys a big auto plant in Detroit, July 8, 1909, adds Cadillac car factory to its holdings. Reported price, $5 million. So they've gone out and they bought Cadillac. He spent $5 million on that. They're going to buy other companies. They're going to aggressively expand with a new plant, and that's going to make their finances a little tight. It's going to cause some trouble in just a short while, but in the meantime, here's what the public thinks of him. This is an article in the Flint Journal of November 25th, 1909. Genius of General Motors, Napoleon of auto industry. I hope he ends up a little better than Napoleon did. It says here, the personality and business methods of Mr. William C. Durant, who is making Michigan as well as Flint famous in the motor world. As I said earlier, it's literally Silicon Valley. But all this expansion, all of this acquisition puts him in a situation that if there's a downturn in sales or if interest rates rise, he may not be able to meet his obligations on the money he's borrowed to finance all this stuff. And that comes to pass. Article in the Lansing Journal, Wednesday, November 16th, 1910. General Motors in syndicate hands. Well, you never want to be in the hands of the syndicate. But anyways, what kind of syndicates is doing this? It says, executive and financial management of the company to be entirely reorganized. The control of General Motors Company yesterday formally passed into the hands of the New York and Boston Bonding Syndicate, headed by J&W Seligman and Company and Lee Higginson and Company, which recently provided the company with funds to pay off its debt by purchasing $15 million of its 6% bonds. The company was successful. The company was selling cars hand over fist. They were the largest manufacturer in the nation. The problem is that too much money was going out despite what was coming in, and they got in a situation where they just basically had to give up control of the company to the money men. And one of the conditions of the money men taking over was that we had to get rid of William C. Durant. They looked at him as being, he was just too, in their opinion, just too reckless. He spent more money than he had, and they had to get the company finances under control. That meant he's out. So what do? You're a 50-year-old guy. You're wealthy because you still have the shares, and the company's still worth a fortune. And what are you worth? 50 million, 100 million? That's $1 billion or two. In real money. Would you just retire? Well, that's what I'd probably do. That's probably what 98% of you would do. But that's not what he does. William C. Durant, formerly Vice President and General Manager of the General Motors Company, one of the largest automobile corporations in the United States, arrived in San Francisco yesterday morning. And this is December 29th. 1911. Since retiring as general manager of the big motor company early this year, Durant has devoted his time to several corporations in which he is the working head, and he is now the moving spirit in the Chevrolet Motor Company of Detroit, a new organization that is soon to put out 2 attractive 6-cylinder cars. He starts Chevrolet. That's bold and ambitious, but he had no trouble raising the money. He's like, you're going to see this. He's like Pompey the Great. Your Roman history? When Pompey the Great is battling Julius Caesar and he's outside of the gates of Rome, Pompey makes the statement that, don't worry about where I'm going to get my men. I need only stamp my feet and I can create legions. Well, the thing about our man today is that he doesn't stamp his feet up. Maybe he holds a press conference, but he can raise legions of investors. It says about that, Detroit man and big corporation, William C. Durant goes into $65 million company, which will have 12 factories. William C. Durant of Detroit, who's actively interested in the Chevrolet Motor Company, which is to build a large factory on Woodward, is one of the leading members of the new corporation just formed in New York with $65 million in capital. He's combining what he does. He's going to do with his new Chevrolet company what he previously did with General Motors. He's going to combine it with Republic, the little corporation, and Chevrolet to form the new entity of Chevrolet. Chevrolet's the backbone, but he's got other interests. Other companies they're going to compete head to head with General Motors. It's noted that after a time, Mr. Durant got out of the General Motors Company and then organized the Chevrolet Motor Company, of which he is the head day-to-day. It is said that he is worth $10 million. And here's a little boosters, and here's what the public thinks of him. And that he has unlimited resources, and his credit is always and has been the best. The Chevrolet Motor Company has an immense plant in Flint, Michigan, capable of manufacturing 30,000 automobiles a year, that one plant. Now, in the 19-teens, what happens if one of the big automakers like Chevrolet comes to your town and offers to open up a plant? Well, here's what happened in Tarrytown, New York. News of the sale of the idle Maxwell Auto Factory, followed by assurances that the new owner is to put it in full operation, drives villagers into raptures of happiness. When was the last time you were in a rapture of happiness? It's been a while for me, but here's what the paper said. News of the purchase of the Kingsland Point plant at Tarrytown of the Maxwell Motor Company by the Chevrolet Motor Company, of which William C. Durant is president, has been received in that Hudson River village with the greatest enthusiasm and described in the Tarrytown Daily News as follows. It says here that the news spread like wildfire and that everybody was delighted goes without saying. No news was ever more gladly received. Merchants plastered signs in their windows announcing the sale, and the proverbial smile was on every face, and it was there to stay. It's the equivalent of if Google or Amazon or Apple were coming to your town. That's exactly what the automobile industry was in the early 1900s. Now, people love William C. Durant. There's an article here in the Californian of Salinas, California, June 17th, 1915, and after reading it 50 times, I can't tell whether this is an advertisement or an article. I think it's an article, but my goodness. Here it goes. The masterpiece of veteran builder, 1960 Chevrolet Baby Grand. That's what they're calling their car. It's going to sell for $865. It says here, the veteran builder, William C. Durant, is not new in the automobile industry. It is his mastermind that built up General Motors Company, the largest and strongest financial organization in the world today, which now builds such popular cars as Cadillac and Buick. Now, so it has to be an article because they're praising General Motors, but it's through the mechanism of William Durant. Talking about the new car, its materials reflect the fitness of Durant's personality, and the completed vehicle is an entirely living personification of this modern successful businessman. Wow. I've never heard such praise. They talk about the Baby Grand. Our cars of superior style, class, speed, and comfort without the frills of fancy prices. You will buy it because it has the class of an imported car without the price. And the reason for this price is made possible by the wonderful brains of the veteran builder, William C. Durant. I've never seen a car review. I've never seen anything like that. You would have to think that that's an ad, but apparently that's an article. They love the man so much. Now, William C. Durant is about to perform this is in fact the biggest, most unexpected development ever in the history of Wall Street. And here it is. The Free Press, September 30th, 1915, Chevrolet Motor forms $20 million holding company. It's noted that talking about the new plants, the motors and axles and other parts will be manufactured in Flint. Not a big deal. It's a new assembly plant with capacity of 200 cars a day. It'll employ 1,000 men. That's not the big deal. The big deal is what comes later in the story. When the board of directors of the Chevrolet Motor Company met in New York recently, it is stated by officers of the company that they authorized the purchase of approximately 52% of the stock of General Motors Company, giving Chevrolet stock in exchange. They bought General Motors. Chevrolet, 5 years after he's booted out, he gets it in such great financial position that he goes in and he buys his former company, General Motors. He then boots out their board, the guys that booted him out. It's not that the stock involved in the post-transfer is held at the present time by a syndicate. Now, it's always a syndicate, but this one is headed by William C. Durant, president of the Chevrolet Motor Company. And the entire deal, one of the biggest ever attempted in American finance, was conceived by Mr. Durant. I bet it was. How do you think William C. Durant felt after he kicked out the board and bought back General Motors? Well, felt pretty good. Here we are on Saturday, January 29th, 1916, the New York Gazette. Chevrolet now has $80 million in capital. Durant's latest startles the world, the absorption of General Motors. It says here, the acquisition of the controlling interest of the General Motors Company by the Chevrolet Company makes Chevrolet the automobile company with the largest capital in the country. Turned it into the biggest company in America, by taking over the guys that gave him the boot. The paper notes, fewer than 7 years ago, Mr. Durant was master of a plant which storied in the capacity of 16 cars a year. Today he heads one enterprise which will turn out about 75,000 automobiles this year and probably no less than $200,000 the next. The central figure in a tremendous merger in the automobile trade and the manipulation of millions, Mr. Durant is essentially a self-made man, a man who abandoned the carriage business when the automobile promised to wipe that business out, and who made in the new field of automobile manufacturing a wonderful and amazing success. And there he had. And if his story had ended then, and he just stayed on the board, just quietly accumulated his wealth, he'd have been a billionaire. He'd have been a billionaire before billionaires were common. But that's not who he is. He always has to be on the move. And one of the things he does here, once he's back in control of General Motors, he starts buying things again. He goes out in 1918 and buys the Guardian Refrigerator Company, which he personally renames Frigidaire. I don't know whether he was thinking they were going to air condition automobiles or whether he just really liked to have a cool office, but he buys the Frigidaire company, and that company stayed in business and continues to stay in business to the present day, making high quality white goods. But all was not rosy for William C. Durant. His acquisitions and expansions of General Motors led to the same problem that he'd had years before. He gets in a situation here, well, despite the fact that the company's selling cars hand over fist and making a lot of money, he's just spending it too fast. He's buying other companies, he's expanding plant, and he doesn't leave enough money in reserve to take care of debt. And once again, well, here's what happened in context of his resignation, which I'll tell you happens. It goes, William Durant, who only a few weeks ago resigned as president of the General Motors Corporation following the acquisition of the greater portion of his stockholders by the DuPont Securities Company and the J.P. Morgan Company, what do you think he has? He lost the company now to a new syndicate of new bankers. They tossed them out again. Well, here's what he's doing. He's undertaking the organization of a new automobile concern known as Durant Motors. So just as he did previously when the board turfed him, he started Chevrolet, gets turfed again, starts Durant Motors. In almost no time, just like Pompey the Great, he was able to raise $5 million through investors to start his corporation almost instantly. Corporation was good. Well, the Durant Motor Company did the same thing that GM does. They produced a line of automobiles, had different segments in there. They had their own version of Buick and Oldsmobile. It was quite successful, and it was successful enough that there were rumors, well, the Brooklyn Eagle, Friday, November 7th, 1924, William C. Durant about to stage comeback in General Motors. That's the rumor. Is he going to come back? What the article gets to is the fact that, unlike most fellows, like if Henry Ford needs to buy something or do something, he just cuts a check. And he knows a few other guys that could cut equally large size checks, but that's not what William Durant does. What William Durant is, he's a man of the people. He manages through like 2 or 3 years of operation to accumulate 150,000 small private investors. That's who's backing his company here. The article states, at the head of this army is a young-looking, smiling man of 63. He's known to his mother as my boy Willie. To the rest of us, he is William C. Durant, president of the Durant Enterprises, founder of General Motors, and General Motors, the second or third largest corporation in the world, the man who was frozen out of that institution twice. So the question is he going to get General Motors back? Is he going to raise enough money? Is he going to do it? Well, he's trying, and he's running his company. The article that I just quoted here describes him as America's greatest salesman, that within a year he had taken orders for 30,000 vehicles worth $31 million, that he's got a personal estimated worth at this time in 1924 back up to $10 million, and that he's on his way. But something happened. And what happened was 1929. He might have got there to take over General Motors again, but 1929 happens. And what does a fatally optimistic person do with their money in the 1920s? Well, they invested in the stock market. And do they just buy $100 worth of stock with $100? No, they buy $1,000 worth of stock with $100. They buy it on margin. And he put virtually all of his money into the market. And when the market dropped 23 points over 2 days, October 29th and October 30th, 1929, he lost half his money. But that wasn't the end, because the stock market was going to end up losing 85% of its value through 1932. And he would lose all of his money and more. Flavor of what was going on in those heady days of 1929, 1930. The Buffalo Daily Law Journal, Thursday, January 26, 1933, in context of a legal suit that was brought by Durant against his broker, gives you a flavor of what was going on. It says here, Testimony disclosed that the brokers had made futile efforts to get in touch with Durant for more than a week, and his margins, having dropped almost to the vanishing point, had started selling his holdings on October 11, 1930. The next day, it was testified Mr. Durant got in touch with the brokers and tried to put up more collateral to cover his margins, but the collateral not being sufficient, the brokers resumed selling his holdings. Not only did he try to cover his margins, bring in more money to make up for the losses, but he invested his last $60 million into stocks over 1920 and 30 in a futile attempt to stabilize the market. It had worked in the past. J.P. Morgan had done it in the past. Large purchases like that had calmed the markets, but this was too big for any one or any 10 investors, and it just swamped them. It didn't have to happen that way. We've talked about how many times he could have got out of this. If he'd have just been a little more, just a tiny bit less optimistic, if he had just taken a tenth of his fortune, $10 million, and done a silly thing, conservative thing, and bought silver with it in 1927. And if he had done even a conservative thing with that, if he had taken that and buried it in his backyard, just bury that silver, that his great-grandkids could come by today, dig that silver up, and it would sell for $770 million. But he didn't take 10% and put it away. He took 100% and put it into the market. And where did that lead him? Well, led him to this Saginaw News article of February 9th, 1936. Bankruptcy petition filed by W.C. Durant filed a voluntary petition in bankruptcy today. He listed liabilities of $914,000 and assets of $250,000, the value of the clothes on his back, and that's it. The people at General Motors, the board of directors couldn't stand to see their former president and founder destitute. So they, out of the good of their heart, they voted him a pension of $10,000 a year, which is $250,000 a year, and that allowed. At least it allowed William to live out the rest of his life with some degree of dignity. But it didn't stop him from trying to get back into the business game. And there's a fun article here in the Saginaw News, Sunday, June 9th, 1940. The amazing Mr. Durant making a new comeback. And he had an idea. And the idea was great. And it would have worked. But he was 30 years ahead of himself. Here's what it was. He used to be called a financial wizard, a Midas who could make money when most others could not. In the 1920s, he possessed a fortune estimated at $120 million. It was but one of several fortunes he had accumulated and lost during one of the most amazing careers in American financial and industrial history. Today, in his 79th year, undismayed and optimistic as ever, he has opened 3 of what he hopes to be the first unit of a chain of recreational centers, bowling alleys for clean sports in cities throughout the United States. Back in the 1930s, bowling alleys occupied a space just above pool halls in the hierarchy of infamy. It was certainly not a place you would take your family, but he thought that the game would lend itself to that. He started a fast food restaurant with an attached bowling alley, family activities, a recreation center in effect. And that's where bowling went in the 1950s, into the 60s, into the 70s in the heyday. If he had been 30 years later, his company might have become AMF. That was the company that made all the bowling equipment back in the day. He was that kind of guy. He had the great idea. He just didn't have the money. And it was 20 years too soon. But it was said here in the article that the one-time financial genius who says proudly, "I once controlled the stock market for 2 years and never sold a share of stock short," tells you frankly, "I haven't a dollar, but I'm happy and I'm carrying on because I find I just can't stop." That's just who he was, that kind of driven guy. His last venture, the last time we see him in the papers, is Sunday, December 27th, 1942, Jackson Citizen, Jackson, Michigan. It's in reference to a cinnabar mine. Not a cinnabon, not pastry, a cinnabar. Cinnabar is the mineral that you get mercury out of, just like you get aluminum from bauxite. And this fellow here, Ernest A. Morose, who coincidentally was the first manager of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, who we dealt with in our Rickenbacker episode, he's found a property there that apparently is getting between 2 and 30 pounds of mercury per ton. And it says here that Morose, it was stated, interested William C. Durant, founder of General Motors Corporation, a longtime friend after Durant visited the Cinnabar property. They were apparently he was going to try to raise capital to help his friend with this mine, but his health was failing and he never was able to execute that deal. And on March 17th, 1947, he dies. The Flint Journal has the headline, "William C. Durant dies, founder of GM, led industrial development here." It says here, "Flint Wizard 3 times toppled from czardom of motor industries." He was as close. Him and Henry Ford were the co-czars, I guess. And like I said, it didn't have to end that way. There were several times he had many opportunities to walk away a rich man. He could have walked away with the cart company when it folded. It had been making millions for the equivalent of millions for years. His first time through General Motors, if he had just tended the ship, sold his stock, he'd have been a billionaire. Same with Chevrolet. Same with the second time he was in General Motors. If he had just consolidated his holdings and taken a step back, remember by that point in time he's in his 60s, but he just couldn't stop. He's perennially optimistic. He's actually a fatal optimist. It's a wonderful thing to have. He wasn't motivated by money. He didn't want to get rich. The money almost didn't matter. What he wanted to do was build something. And that he did. And while he wasn't able to keep control of it until the end of his life, he founded and built General Motors, which remains one of the largest companies in the world in terms of employment and sales. And it's because of him that, well, as we started, you know the names Buick, Chevrolet, Oldsmobile, Frigidaire. That's William C. Durant. Now, if you were going to use one word to describe William C. Durant in the 19-teens and the 1920s, that word would be tycoon, which is defined as a powerful business leader who has accumulated great wealth, power, and influence in a particular industry. Well, that's what he did. William C. Durant was the embodiment of a tycoon. So let's finish our day with a tycoon cocktail. It's a variation on a champagne cocktail, but I'm telling you, don't use champagne. There's no reason to. Any good sparkling wine will do. Now, it begins with 1 part gin, 1 part apricot brandy, a half a part Galliano for that little vanilla flavor, the juice of 1/4 of a lime, 1 part triple sec, a lot of stuff going in here. You top it up with sparkling wine. So you would build this drink in a champagne flute. Get the largest one you can because there's a lot of ingredients to this. You build it, you top it up with sparkling wine, not champagne, garnish with a lime wedge. Refreshing, beautiful drink. Look back on a life well lived of William C. Durant. Now, I'm going to ask you guys to like and subscribe again. We'll be back here next week with another episode. And if you subscribe, you'll know exactly when. Anyways, everybody out there, have a great day. Okay, take care.